Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This session is the session by Smoothwall, and we're talking about the need for managed web access as a part of your security setup. If anybody expected to be in a different session, now's the time. Yeah. If anybody, having heard the title, wants to be in a different session, now's the time. If anybody is looking for an incredibly detailed technical session, this isn't it. In fact, I can guarantee you this isn't it. There are some technical words, but they're technical words, and if anybody wants to ask technical questions following them, I will evade them later. Okay? Okay, so managed web access is essential to your security. Oh, I will also apologize. I have a habit of wandering around during presentations, and apparently the radio mics don't work too well. So if I do move away, I'll try and shout, and hopefully you'll be able to hear me. What are we going to talk about? Smoothwall is a company that provide web filtering and security solutions. Our biggest market to date is in schools. And over a period of time, we've started to see a change in the young people's behavior at schools. And what we're also starting to see is that behavior come through into the workplace. So what we're going to be talking about is the impact of the digital generation on the workplace and how that affects security risks. I'm going to talk a bit about the psychology, and what I'm really doing is previewing a white paper that we're going to be actually launching at the InfoSec exhibition next month. And we've been working with some legal experts and some psychologists to try and actually understand the impact of changing behavior in young workers and understand how that rolls through not just to security but also quite strongly into liability, and I'll come to that later. There are new changing rules around what's called vicarious liability, and they could be coming to a business near you soon. Just to overview again, we're going to talk about what you can do about these types of situations and try and understand whether the idea of being able to lock down is both practical and sensible, or whether there is some other way to be able to move forward. For those of you who want something technical, I present the Smoothwall box. It's very nice. It has the word Smoothwall on it, and a little display and lights and plugs. That is about as technical as we're going to get. Seriously though, if anybody wants to talk technicalities, see me afterwards. Out in the exhibition room is a guy called Henry who is far more capable about talking about this sort of stuff than I am. Go see Henry and we can talk to you. The digital generation. If you take a 21-year-old who's leaving university and coming into the workplace, there's a number of things we know about them. Chances are it's a woman, not a man, because the ratio of women attending university to men is quite strongly skewed. In the year they were born, in 1992, the first commercial email service was launched. By the time they reached 5, BBC Online was there, and the dancing baby was the big thing. Yeah. By the time they went to senior school, then Facebook, podcasts, and Gmail were there. That's to all intents and purposes today. And a couple of years later, you had iPlayer and Google Street View and whatever. These people have grown up almost entirely within the framework of what those of us who are considerably older called the information revolution and the web revolution and all these sorts of things. It's second nature. It is not even something to be considered. And if they're 18 and coming into the workplace, then it's not those things, but you're talking about eBay in the year they were born. EchoBay sold its first item. Amazon was started. These are people who do not understand, cannot comprehend of a world without the internet. And that changes attitudes, and that changes expectations. and it's changing psychology. Just a few stats around the joys of smartphones. Ofcom did some research last year. If you look at 12 to 15-year-olds, 60% of them have got smartphones. Yeah? And it's actually higher. Almost 70% of girls have got smartphones. It's slightly lower for boys. So over 60% have got smartphones. And amongst that 60%, every week, and you and I know that that's not just every week, this is pretty much every day. I have two 14-year-old children, and I can tell you this is every day. Yeah. They visit social networking sites with them, they take photographs, they use it to messaging, they play games, they visit websites, social networking, all on that device. I was at a conference last week in Norfolk talking to schools, and we were talking about this in the context of trying to manage students' behavior within the school day. And the next line on that slide said, it would be naive to imagine that this was done always outside of lesson time. Well, the same thing applies here. With people that have come into work, it would be naive to think that these sorts of tasks are being done at lunchtime and coffee breaks. They're being done all the time. And the older people get, the more likely it is to have a smartphone. The more likely they are to have a smartphone. Who doesn't have a smartphone in the room? I think that's 4, 5, 6 people. 6 people. And there's probably 7 over there, probably about 70 of you in here. So 90% of you have got a smartphone. Just think about the smartphone for a minute. Yeah? You've got a device which will take pictures and video and audio. It has the ability to stand as a USB connected device if you have a lead to go with it. It has the internet, it has access to email. James Bond would have killed for it. Yeah? As a device to gather and send information, absolutely fantastic. 90% of the people in this room have got one. Yeah? And when somebody walks into the workplace, you have absolutely no control over what happens to that phone. Because let's be honest, schools have tried to ban them and failed. Yeah? What we see is a massive move from schools banning all phones coming on site to them now starting to say, okay, but as long as you use it at lunchtime. Okay, as long as you don't use it to take photographs. Look at Facebook, you'll see the number of photographs that come up from school. In the workplace, it's almost impossible. Are you going to say to people coming through the door, hand your phone in? Well, no, frankly, you can't do that. But there is a device in people's hands which, if you want to talk about security risks, is absolutely fantastic potential. When you start looking at the psychology of 18 to 24-year-olds, the digital generation, there are some very, very worrying trends. And when we started doing the work towards this paper, I was completely unaware of them. And we started talking to clinical psychologists, and they said, oh yeah, there are all these things that are happening. And we think it's due to intensive use of social networking. And we think it's due to intensive use of messaging, which is at second degree. And I certainly hadn't heard of them, and they make a worrying view. But let's just start with some numbers. 20% of people of this age band are unemployed. That's pretty scary. Over a third that are in work are doing jobs which are significantly below their level of qualification. I worked in an office down in Wapping. We were working mainly for the financial services guys that were around here, and we had 120 people in the office. 50% of them had degrees. We had PhDs. We had all sorts of qualifications, and they were basically call center drones. Just bang, 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 call after call after call. Really, really dull, really boring, not even remotely close to the level of qualification they had. And our turnover was probably about 40% a year. Yeah. Just think of the level of dissatisfaction that people in those sorts of jobs have. And then if you take a view of where people thought they were going to be and where they end up, again, another source of frustration. A survey that was done, children across all sorts of ages, starting at year 7 and going up to just before they left after A-levels. Basically, if you take that survey, there is no statistical connection between what people say they want to do and where they end up working. Something like 45% of people said they wanted to be in culture and media or be sportsmen and women. Yeah, 2% actually get to do that. Yeah, 24% of workers are in distribution, hotels and restaurants. About 2% said they wanted to be. And the 2% that said they wanted to be saw themselves not as basically servers or whatever. They saw themselves as head chefs. They saw themselves as effectively the media stars. They wanted to be Gordon Ramsay of the restaurant trade. They didn't see themselves just working. There is a significant problem in terms of people coming into the workplace's expectations and what gets delivered to them. So you add that to the frustration that comes from the fact that their qualifications are desperately underutilized, that they've gone through an education system which has basically said qualifications will deliver you the job that you want, and they come out into the world of work and the reality is very, very different. What does that mean in terms of people's opinion or their degree of loyalty or the degree to which they care about what goes on in the business that they're placed in? I don't think I need to really push it any further to explain that there is a significant security risk that comes from that attitude. And the theme that I'm going to come back to through my talk is that the security risk we need to be managing now is people and what they'll do, and being able to understand how they'll flip into doing something that actually is really dangerous without ever really meaning to. And how do you control that? It's a horrible working title. Risk and the Digital Allergic Generation. And the reason we're calling it the allergic generation is quite interesting because what you've got is a hypersensitivity to being told that something you're doing isn't quite right, or being told that you can't do something. So the reaction that you get is disproportionate to what somebody's being told they can or can't do. So we started to look at what was available in terms of information about social media usage, IT usage. 4,000 interviews. This was done in Sweden. People who were classed as intensive social media usage showed stress-related disorders, sleeping disorders, and depression. Why? Why would that be? The primary reason seems to be a degree of obsession, an unwillingness to actually switch away from Facebook, because somebody might just comment on that comment that you put up there, or Twitter. Somebody might retweet what you've done, and you can't stop looking just in case it happens. And there is a degree of obsession that starts to build, which leads to these types of results. Okay, so you've got frustrated individuals who are likely to be intensive social media users, who are then starting to suffer from these types of psychological effects. Larry Rosen in California did the same sort of study and found antisocial behavior, fine, narcissism, yeah, narcissism, this view that I am the most important person in the world, and anything that you do to me is actually, it's not just a problem, but it's almost a slight, it's actually a major issue because I am the most important person in the world. So again, you're starting to build a picture of the people that are coming through into the workplace. Frustrated because they can't do the job that they wanted to do. Frustrated because the qualifications they've got aren't being used. And very, very focused on themselves, and potentially with a number of disorders starting to come through. Certainly incipient, if not actually moving to full blown. And then you start to actually pull out some actual syndromes. And these are coming from the work that we are actually doing with clinical psychologists. Intermittent explosive disorder. It's great when you can actually start to, you can have acronyms for them. This is something which people do suffer from in day-to-day life, so 6% they reckon, so there are going to be some people in this room who will occasionally suffer from this. And what it is, it's that massive overreaction to something quite simple, but you see it far more online. So who's seen the blog page where somebody's got upset and then written an absolute screed in caps, and it's all in caps, and their language is absolutely unbelievable, and it's just this kind of rant that goes on and on and on. Yeah, that's this explosive disorder. And it's believed that a large proportion of what's behind it is the fact that so much communication is done effectively one step removed. When you stand and you look somebody in the eye, you can make a judgment about how people are feeling. But if what you're doing is responding to something online, whether that be a blog or whether that be social media, then you don't see that person, and therefore you value their reaction less. And we see this coming through in terms of what people will post, say on Twitter. So the examples recently of the Greek athlete coming up to the Olympics who retweeted something which was considered to be racist, got banned from the Olympics. People that retweeted the allegations about Lord McAlpine and are being sued. There is a very short window that it takes to actually do that task, and because it's all at second hand or third hand, the barrier to doing it is reduced. So let's just go back through it. Frustrated, undervalued, explosive, and really, really easy ways to push information around that you don't worry about because it's not real. Low frustration tolerance disorder. This is even better. This is the obsession with getting something that you want, and it's the obsession that says, I don't care whatever else is going on, this item that I either want to avoid or I want to get is the most important thing in the world. So that backs up people's obsession with getting that tweet out or getting this message on Facebook. And what you get is people who will sacrifice any other task for the accomplishment of something that they're obsessed about. It's a form of procrastination, really. It's, I don't care about this work, I'm going to worry about this tiny bit. Somebody's put a blog which I don't like, so actually I'm going to spend the next 6 hours ranting and raving on this blog rather than doing what I've got to do. And it's another expression of this inability to make a sensible judgment about whether your reaction to something is appropriate. And that's where I'm trying to get with this. From a security perspective, think about the model that we're talking about, the classic sort of criminal means, motive, and opportunity. This is motive. This is absolutely motive. If you're going to be a person who will get absolutely incensed by the smallest thing and feel the need to communicate about it and feel the need to do something about it, irrespective of what that does to the rest of what you're supposed to be doing, that's motive. We'll talk about means and opportunity in a minute. A couple more. Scarily, what psychologists are seeing amongst young people is a flowering of Munchausen syndrome. This isn't the one by proxy where somebody makes somebody else ill to get attention, but it's the attention-seeking idea. So people who will effectively, seems like a cry for help, but there's no actual need for help really underlying it. The classic, and again the internet has made this much easier, is a girl who pretended that she was dying of leukemia. And for 2 years, she kept Facebook absolutely convinced that she was dying of leukemia, and even went to the extent of then cutting it off and getting other posts to say that this person had died. And this kind of double life loss of touch with reality. And again, that means a loss of touch with understanding the consequences of your actions. Security. And just a few sort of general points. Again, this is from what we've gathered. Young people have a very, very high degree of regard to what they consider to be their rights. Yeah, again, I have 14-year-old children, and they have very strong views about what their rights are, and their rights are generally whatever it is they want. Yeah, has become a right, as opposed to a possible or a maybe. There's a requirement for guidance, and they want somebody to be telling them what the right thing to do is, and to be giving constant positive feedback. Yeah. And then contrarily, any form of correction so that you can do it right is then completely and utterly overblown. And I can take the example of my son for this. He's doing his homework and he'll say to me, "Dad, I just need your help. I just need your help with this piece of homework." So I'll say to him, "Well, you really should be doing that like this. And if you thought about writing it like that," No, I don't want you to tell me what to do. I just need your help." Doesn't make sense. There is a contrary nature in there, which again is quite difficult. And then there's this thing about, it's called fast twitch reactions. This isn't about muscles, this is mental muscles. But it's the bit that other people have called thintelligence, or the Wikipedia obsession. You want to know something, so what do? You look it up on Wikipedia, you read the 2-line summary that goes on the top, and that's the answer. Yeah? Nobody considers that Wikipedia is written by ordinary people and has a varying degree of truth or otherwise. Nobody considers that the other 5 pages of detail that are in there actually need to be read in order to understand what's happening. It is a fast twitch reaction, so if the first 2 lines say it's something bad, it doesn't matter how much you try and convince somebody that it's not bad, that's their reaction. I think you're starting to get the picture, or at least I hope you're starting to get the picture, that young people coming into work have a very different mindset to the people who have gone before them. And I'm not saying that the internet has been a bad thing, but it's changed people. And we need to recognize that it's changed people, and we need to recognize it in terms of our security measures. And also in terms of this liability. Now, there's a legal doctrine that's called the thin skull doctrine. And what it basically means is, they say in the legal profession, you have to take the victim that's in front of you. So if something you do, basically it came from a case where somebody got bashed on the head, they happened to have a very thin skull and died. Yeah? The person who attacked them said, "But I never intended to kill them." But the judgment was, it doesn't matter, it's what you have in front of you, and you're guilty of murder. Well, it's the same thing with people coming into the workplace. We have to take the people that are in front of us and understand the psychology of the people that are coming into our businesses and start to build measures that go around that. Evasion. Again, this is one of the reasons that we got into this, because where we filter web content in schools, what we see is a massive desire for people to get around them. And it started quite simply and has become increasingly complex. Early attempts, just using secure sites, so hopefully you wouldn't understand what the traffic was, but the big change came with anonymous proxies. And that was fine, and if you take a site like hidemyass.com, yeah, then once the school learns about that site, and they're quite open, yeah, log through our system, and you can hide what you're doing. Once the school gets a hold of that, you can block it, and that's fine. However, of course, what we've now got, zero-day proxies. You go onto Twitter, or you go onto Google Groups, or wherever you like, and you will find lists of today's proxies that have been tested. And kids are using them to get around restrictions at school. So if you go into a school, and I taught physics for a little while in school, and you'd go into the computer rooms and you'd see bank after bank of kids playing games. Why were they playing games? Because they were using proxies to get past the filtering, because it was URL blocking, rel specific. And the people that block URLs tend to be 5 to 10 days behind, because you have to find out that the proxy's there. And there are some newer evasion techniques which are more worrying. They do have to, however, be loaded as pieces of software. So anonymous VPNs, yeah, and then scarily the use of the onion router, which we are starting to see in schools. And it's particularly a problem when people can bring their own device. So you imagine it. I don't know how many of you have started to have the request or are allowing people to bring devices into your businesses. They can come loaded with these things. Yeah. VPNs you can spot just about. The onion router, because it's so port agile, is very, very, very difficult. Quite difficult for people inside your business if you've locked down the ability to be able to actually load software onto the machine, but bring your own devices, making this type of threat a reality. And once you go out on one of these, then you can get anywhere. I don't know how many of you have been into Silk Road over the onion router, but there are some very strange things that you can buy there. Explosives and guns and any manner of drugs you like. And it's all there in an eBay-like shop, which you can get to by loading this software. And it's virtually untraceable. Will they be used? Well, mobile operators are already getting bypassed with the zero-day proxies. Yeah, the mobile operators have done a great job of trying to put age control software onto their systems. Generally, it works, but the zero-day proxies just go straight past them. So yes, they're going to be used. I won't tell you who it is, but we worked for an organization and put some of our boxes in what we call stealth mode. And we were assured that we didn't need to go and put these boxes into certain locations because the users there didn't have any opportunity to use the machines, and they were locked away in rooms, and they were only for use of senior staff, and therefore it was unnecessary. And we said, actually, let's go and put a couple of test boxes in and just see what happens. Yeah. In the first couple of days, we saw games, gambling, adult content, proxies. Yeah? And these were machines that apparently people didn't have access to and didn't have the time to do it, were managers' machines. Yeah? And that's what we saw. So are these methods of evasion going to be used? Yes. Absolutely no question about it whatsoever. Yeah? And depending upon how your business is set up, and some of them are going to get passed. Some of these evasion methods. So, means. Yeah? We've talked about motivation. These are the means. And why is it a problem? Because the sites that people are going to try and get to when they use these methods of evasion are the sites where the malware sits. Yeah? It's the gaming sites. It's the peer-to-peer music sites. That's where the malware is. Yes, we know that it's sitting on, the NBC website was grabbed recently and was delivering malware. But the sites where it's consistently delivered from are the sites that people use when they use these evasion techniques. Because they know they're going to places which otherwise wouldn't be acceptable. And that's where the malware sits. So it is a security risk. Also, you've got a situation where you can get people transferring data out. So, a quick review. Graduates coming into jobs that they really wish they weren't doing. Psychological factors make them liable to rash actions, make them insensitive to the needs and feeling of others. I don't care if I do this because it's not real. Yeah? I can happily go and shoot people on a game. It doesn't matter. It's not real. So therefore, if I undertake an action at work, if I send some information to somebody, if I take some data, it's not real. Hypersensitivity to criticism. So you tell me that what I'm doing is not allowed, and what's my next step? I'm going to do it even more. I'm going to find a way to get around that because you've told me that I'm wrong, and you're not allowed to tell me I'm wrong because I'm the most important person in the world. Resentful of authority. So, lots of motive, many years of evading restrictions, easy to transfer data, lots of questionable sites, and back to the smartphone, the ultimate infiltration device. Yeah, my iPhone has 16 gigs of space on it that I could download pretty much anything that I wanted to, if my computer allows me to plug a USB device in. And how many people don't secure their machines to USB devices? And it's deliberate and accidental breaches as well. Think about opportunity. Opportunity is a bit more difficult, but again, going back to jobs that I've been in where there are call centres, there are quiet times. Yeah, you don't keep your eye on people all the time. There aren't CCTV cameras focused on every individual to see what they're doing. It takes about, any of you could find and log on to a zero-day proxy in about a minute. Yeah, Google Groups, find a site, go into a browser, tap the address in, you're there. That's all it takes. So there's not a long, complex setup procedure in order to be able to do something that's not considered to be appropriate. It's very, very quick. So the opportunity certainly exists, but perhaps not all the time. Now, if we're talking about deliberate breaches, what you would almost consider to be criminal activity, means, motive, and opportunity are the basics. I don't know whether you would disagree with me, but it seems to me, and it certainly seems to us during this research that we've been doing, that all of the necessary steps are there for serious, deliberate security breaches. And some of the factors that drive it, particularly this desire to evade restrictions, particularly the desire to show people that you're better than them, this desire to get what you want at any time, even if that's not a deliberate breach of security, it can easily lead to an accidental one. So it's a real problem. I'll just come back to this question of liability. Suppose I walk into any of your offices, yeah, and I bring my smartphone with me, and you very kindly allow me to use your wireless network. I log on using an anonymous proxy to a site and download adult content. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but suppose I did. One of the people in your organization sees that and is offended by it. What do they do? What can they do? They can sue you. And they can sue you under two things. One is under employment law, and one is effectively straightforward for their level of distress. Yeah? It's called vicarious liability. You may have no control over what I do. And in fact, it doesn't even need to be your wireless network. It can be over my cellular network. But you, as an organization, have a duty to protect your people from inappropriate material and can get sued for it if you don't. And it's a big reputational risk and a financial risk. The sorts of settlements you're talking about run into the tens of thousands. Yeah? And they are going through the employment tribunals all the time. It is quite scary, and the bring your own device scenario has opened up a whole new realm of risk. So I raise that because I know we're talking about cybersecurity and we're talking about infiltration and the rest of that, but in terms of the overall risk to a business, this is part of it as well. And in terms of protecting your organizations, this is something that taking the right measures in terms of managing web access can protect you from as well. And I make no apologies. For those of you who can't see it, it says, don't worry, our IT team's all over it and they'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can see the impact of having teenage children. If you're in a cloud service, fully networked business, you're using Salesforce, you're using all sorts of whatever, however you're transferring information around, is it realistic that you can cut that away? Well, when I first went to work, I worked for BT, and we just had the new customer service system, CSS, installed. It was sitting on massive water-cooled computers, mostly in Harmondsworth, and that was it. That was what you had. Yeah, it was a dumb terminal, and the IT people loved it because there was nothing you could do with it. Yeah, apart from what it was supposed to do. And then a bit later they started to bring PCs in, and the PCs then had a window into CSS, and the IT teams hated it because that meant that you could do things with the PCs that weren't using the system. And this has got more and more and more accentuated. So what you have now is a situation where effectively, even to get to the working systems, you're probably going out on the internet. So can you realistically control it? And I know IT guys, IT security guys, some of the banks around here, what they've said to me is, we would love to be in a position where we could just ban all internet access. Absolutely love it, because it would solve most of our security risks. We'd love to be able to go back and put dumb terminals on people's desks, because it would solve all these issues. But realistically, it can't happen. Not just because of the applications that you use, but also because of the psychology of the workers. Yeah? And the fact that people expect a level of access and get really, really upset if they don't have it. So you can't realistically go back. And even if you do, that's not going to make any impact to mobile devices. And if you allow any web access at all, then unless you've got yourself sorted, you're at risk from zero-day proxies. And as I say, if you make this attempt, you're likely to trigger negative reaction. Just go back to what I was saying about the psychology of young people and the degree to which they will blow up if even a minor restriction is put upon them. So this type of old-style absolute control is going to become less and less effective. Yeah? For those of us who are older and have been through this type of thing for some time, you understand that actually control is a good thing, that being able to limit what people have access to actually benefits productivity. Yeah? It can improve motivation, and it helps people to focus on what they're supposed to be doing. But that is not in the mindset of younger workers. Okay, so if you can't do that, then what can you do? You may be expecting me to jump into a sales pitch here for Smoothwall's managed access. I'm not going to do that. But what I will talk about is, again, the sorts of discussions that we're having with schools. Because what they say is, we have people that we would like to give sensible access to, but to control the things that they can do to ensure that during lesson time they're following lessons. But what we don't want to do is to take away from them access to the information that makes sense. Yeah? So I don't want to block whole pages because there's one tiny bit on it that's inappropriate. They've got smartphones. So obviously you can access all sorts of stuff over your smartphone that the standard web browser on a computer won't allow. So what they say is, how can we actually enable our students to come into a deal with us? We want to actually have some form of collaboration, some form of deal with them that means that we can show that as far as possible we are working to manage what they have access to, but trade off against that some services which mean that there is effectively a win on both sides. And what it comes from is the fact that unless you have a lot of money in 4G, and you have 4G in your area, wireless speeds are still considerably faster than 3G. Yeah? Unless you've got an unlimited contract for 3G, the chances are that if you want to move a lot of data around, then it's still cheaper to use wireless access. So what the schools are starting to talk about is we will allow you, student, to actually have access to our Wi-Fi and use your smartphone and actually encourage you to use it as part of information gathering for lessons. So I've got computers, I've got laptops, I've got tablets, but if you need that piece of information and you're connected to the school's Wi-Fi, which stops you from being able to go to play games, etc., then it becomes an acceptable part of the learning experience to be able to do that. But it's a deal, yeah, and it's almost impossible to enforce. So it's a deal which gives the best possible opportunity. Now my question to you is, if you take the model that we've been talking about, those school children that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, coming into the workplace, is there an equivalent deal? Now, we know there are some organisations who are starting to move down this line, who have specific Wi-Fi zones which are more open and allowed to be used during break times, and they're switched off at other points in the day. Yeah. There is that type of mindset out there, but from a security point of view, obviously, these things are worrying, yeah? And we'd rather not have them. But there's a trade-off to be had because you have younger workers. You have to work with the material that you've got. And the old methods of control will become less and less and less effective. So there has to be some sort of deal. But it's a bit like, I said I taught physics. When you teach mechanics, it's great. Newtonian mechanics, everybody knows the answer is X. You can work through the calculations. And then you start talking about quantum mechanics where you don't know what the answer is and it's a problem. And lots of students really, really don't like that because particularly younger people have a very black and white view of the world. It's either this or it's that. Yeah. And so when you say, well, it could be both, they don't like it. And there's a degree of that here because the new model says that you have to take a risk. You are deliberately bringing risk into your processes and procedures in order to make a system that works for the people that you're getting. And I can understand that that's not comfortable, but it's the move that we believe has to be taken. So, yeah, allow them to have access to the common sites, YouTube. You can even start to differentiate between which bits of YouTube you allow them to have. Yeah? iTunes, Facebook. The connection is faster, it's more reliable, and they're not paying on their 3G bill. Is that a trade-off that makes sense? Certainly in the school situation, then we're starting to see the students say yes, it does make sense. And I don't believe that that view will change radically as those young people come through into the workplace. So as I've said, this is akin to the thin skull argument. Yeah? To work with the people that you get and accept that there are potential weaknesses. We know that the risk factor is much stronger, I think, and I hope that I've demonstrated to you why that is. So your protection has to be stronger. What if an unintentional breach releases customer information? The nightmare for all security people. Your database is suddenly exposed to either somebody hacking or it's deliberately downloaded and passed around. I've got really annoyed with you because you won't let me do this, so I'm going to download that information that I can get there, stick it on my iPhone, and I'm going to send it to somebody else. Hey presto, major security breach, major data protection issue. Frustration builds into those types of actions. The same approach gives you protection from the vicarious liability. That's what I've got. In terms of this thesis of younger workers coming from education into the workplace and bringing those attitudes with them. We think the evidence is almost incontrovertible. We're starting to hear the same thing from businesses, certainly hearing it from universities as school leavers go into a university situation. The risk is changing. The face of the risk that you are going to have to deal with is changing. And the old methods won't work. Now, I don't know whether what we're proposing in terms of a collaborative approach will work. Maybe there's another way of doing it. I don't know. What we're saying is that that collaborative, that approach of agreeing that you will allow some things as a trade-off for a degree of control is something that can be tried. And we're looking to work forward with that as things move forward. Okay, that's about what I have. If anybody has questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And if you have, as I said at the start, if you have technical questions, I'll be happy to evade them.